but it's hard to imagine that these assets would go underbidded because this auction is probably going to attract a lot of attention from a lot of folks around the mining industry. Now, on that note, to answer or to kind of wrap up with a few outstanding things here, the most coveted asset that Compute North has in its fleet of assets are its data centers. So you can imagine that this auction, this 363 sale, will involve all of its data centers, which we go into detail here in this chart. Currently, Compute North has, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 7 outstanding data centers. Some are fully operational, some are partially operational. These include one in Kearney, Nebraska, one in Big Springs, Texas, one in North Sioux City, North Dakota. All of these are fully operational, and these include 2 partially operational facilities, one in Granbury, Texas, also known as Wolf Hollow, and one in McCamey, Texas, also known as King Mountain. And there are 2 that are currently in development that do not have any rigs currently hashing in them, and that is in Corpus Christi, Texas, and the other in Minden, Nebraska. So those data centers would be the kind of, I would say, crown jewels in this auction, and will be what people are probably most interested in addition to maybe some miners, mining machines, or shipping containers to house the machines. Now, that being said, there are a lot of questions that we do not have answered. Like, for instance, I don't know personally, and I've asked around and haven't been able to get a straight answer. So whether or not Compute North owns the land that it is hosting on, or whether or not it leases it. If it is leasing it, which is very likely, and it just owns the infrastructure, then that's going to add another layer of complexity onto this. Now, that being said, who would bid on these assets? We kind of addressed this in the final paragraph or the final section of this newsletter. One person to keep an eye on is NextEra Energy, or NextEra Energy. They've got nearly, like I said, $99 million worth of loans in limbo because of this thing. And they also have a joint venture with Compute North, of which NextEra owns 50% stake. So it might make sense if the dollars, kind of make sense here for NextEra to buy out this joint venture entirely and buy out that facility and just start mining and to recoup its cost of capital. That being said, another player that we might look to if they have the capital for it is Marathon Digital. They do not currently own any of their infrastructure for mining. They've opted for hosts like Compute North. So maybe they would seek a similar buyout. That being said, that seems less likely because Marathon Digital recently signed a deal with Applied Blockchain, which it claims will be able to take on its current fleet and its future expected fleet, which would total 23 exahashes of equipment. And finally, perhaps one dark horse, we have our eyes on Jihan Wu's newly launched $250 million fund, which it claims is going to be used to target distressed miners. So pretty, opportune timing. I'm not saying that they launched that fund to buy up Compute North, but Compute North is in that distressed, company bucket, and perhaps this new fund looks to buy up some of those assets. So something to keep in mind too. If you want to check out the filings for yourselves, I've included them at the bottom of this article. Really interesting stuff in here, a lot of gems, some stuff that I didn't put in this article for simplicity's sake and also just for lack of time. Definitely take a look at it because this is panning out to be probably the biggest Bitcoin mining story so far of the bear market. And with all of that said, we're going to go ahead and move on to another bankruptcy, which is Celsius, which filed for bankruptcy earlier this year. The lending platform also has an extensive Bitcoin mining arm. And right now it is suing Core Scientific, another Bitcoin mining host and public miner, for allegedly violating bankruptcy terms. So, like I said, Celsius had its fleet with Core Scientific, and Celsius a while back said that it was going to keep this Bitcoin mining fleet running in order to try to pay off some of its debts in the bankruptcy filing. And it's looking like Celsius is claiming that Compute North is violating the terms of its contract. because Core Scientific says that Celsius owes approximately $5.4 million to the company, and it is asking Celsius for this money back. But Celsius, is saying in turn that Core Scientific should be held in civil contempt for having violated the automatic stay in relation to Celsius's bankruptcy filing. Now, Celsius also filed for a Chapter 11 bankruptcy to try to reorganize its business to stay afloat. There's a lot of context here, and there's a lot of he said, she said within this. That being said, a few of the hard numbers that I can talk about confidently is that Core Scientific has deployed only 6,500 of the 10,800 rigs that Celsius delivered to Core Scientific facilities. It's provided the company with 21.5 megawatts of power when Celsius says that it was actually entitled to 29.4 megawatts of power by this time in September. Now, another thing here is Core Scientific is saying that its power costs, that its own power, rates have been jacked up over the past quarter, as we've seen kind of across the board from a lot of Bitcoin miners. And it is saying that in its terms with Celsius, that it has the right to pass on these power rate rises to its hosting clients. Celsius is saying that this is another breach of contract, and they're saying that the $3.65 million that Core Scientific has billed Celsius for power cost pass-through is illegitimate. So an interesting thing going on here, kind of just highlighting, looking at Celsius and looking at Compute North together, looking at Celsius's problems with Core Scientific and looking at Compute North. We're starting to see how hosting providers can kind of become, a counterparty risk for a lot of these miners, especially if they do not have long-term power purchasing agreements in place. Now, it's looking like in Compute North's case that they did not actually have the ability contractually to pass on these costs to their hosting clients. That opportunity was not baked into the contract, whereas I've heard from industry sources that Core Scientific does include this in their contracts, and it's looking like at least they're claiming that with the Celsius lawsuit, though obviously Celsius is thinking otherwise. All of that to say, it is another reminder that miners who own their own power and actually have control over their own infrastructure are going to have an easier time in times of uncertainty rather than those who are relying on third-party hosts. It's just simple. It's just operational simplicity, right? It might be a little bit difficult it might be harder in the beginning to secure all those things, but in times of uncertainty and in times of economic stress, like we're seeing in this bear market, it's one less thing to worry about, to not have that counterparty risk. So all of that being said, two things we want to keep an eye on: this Celsius lawsuit with Core Scientific and also Compute North's bankruptcy, especially in regards to what it means for the hosting landscape and for all of the Bitcoin miners that host with these companies. And with that, before we wrap up, or I guess I should say as we wrap up, just want to give a quick shout out to Aspen Creek Digital, which just wrapped up its $8 million Series A. Galaxy Digital and Polychain Capital led the fundraising round. And for those of you who don't know, Aspen Creek Digital is a Bitcoin miner focused on renewable energy. Specifically, the miner has a facility that in Texas that has 30 megawatts of mining capacity on an 87 megawatt solar farm. And so pretty interesting to see a fundraise like this in the bear market. We're seeing kind of capital slow down a lot. It's not being deployed nearly as much. So cool to see this, especially from the renewable side in a time when, a lot of heat is kind of coming from the regulatory and political regimes about Bitcoin mining's energy use. So just wanted to give a quick shout out to Aspen Creek Digital. Cool to see them doing cool things, and congratulations on the $8 million Series A. And with all that, y'all, that is it for this episode of the live stream. Again, we appreciate your patience for yesterday. Thanks for tuning in today. We usually do these on Mondays at 11 a.m. Central Time, and we will be doing it actually on Tuesday next week at 11 a.m. Central Time to account for Columbus Day / Indigenous Peoples Day, depending on who you're talking to. So please tune in with us next Tuesday at 11 a.m. And in the meantime, if you don't already, follow us on Hashrate Index. Follow us on Luxor Tech at Hashrate Index on Twitter and at Luxor Tech Team on Twitter. And if you haven't, please subscribe to the Hashrate Index blog for analysis like the Compute North bankruptcy filing and a weekend newsletter every week about the latest in Bitcoin mining economics and metrics from Hashrate Index. And with all that said, deuces, y'all. Have a beautiful week and happy hashing.